This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode, I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 361 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast about making new friends on your travels. Let me first pay my respects to the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, where I'm recording this podcast today on just the clearest, sunniest, loveliest day after so much winter, by Perth standards anyway, so much winter. So it is actually the beginning of the Jilba season in the Noongar tradition, which is the season of new life. Blooming flowers are beginning to show, the wildflowers, and thankfully we are starting to get out of our cold into the warm. I know if you look at the temperatures, it's not cold here, but if you look at TikTok at all the people who come to Australia and complain about how our houses are very cold, they are right. We do not believe that we should have decent housing sometimes. Certainly in winter, it's just so cold in here. So, on to making new friends on your travels. I've made episodes in the past talking about some of the friends I've made traveling, and actually I've even made episodes featuring those actual friends. On the whole, these friendships run, I guess, the gamut from closeness, like really close friends where I would, stay in regular contact and travel and we'd meet up in other places or stay with each other. But also lots of friends who, we just stay in kind of, distant touch, maybe comment on each other's Instagram stories, but still know what they're up to. And I like all of these. In fact, on the whole, it actually sometimes makes me sad that I have made these friends because it means I have, special people who are spread far and wide across the world. I can never have like a big birthday party with all my favorite people in the same room. But the pros definitely outweigh the cons anyway. I do love having friends with, from all different backgrounds and places and different perspectives to me. And it is, of course, fun to make plans to meet up again too. Now, my first guest today does a lot of this. It's Heidi Brown, who is a law professor and author who loves to travel solo. And she has made friends in a fairly unique way after starting to take trips connected to one of her big loves in life.
U2 has always sort of been in my life. I grew up in the 70s and 80s. And so when MTV was big, that's when I saw the band on TV for the first time. But at the beginning, REM was my favorite band.
I love REM.
And also, my life was not really, it didn't revolve around concerts. I didn't have a ton of money to go to concerts. So it's funny, while U2 was sort of in my life soundtrack for years, and a lot of big events, I played U2 music. When I was sad, I played U2 music. When I worked out, I played U2 music. But I hadn't ever been to a show until 2008. One of my work colleagues took me to my very first U2 show at the Rose Bowl in Los Angeles. And I remember standing there. My friend was playing, totally Mr. Cool, his hands in his pockets, just sort of swaying back and forth. And I felt like my body was on fire. I was so overwhelmed at how amazing that show was. So the next tour, I moved back to I was working in California at the time. I moved back to New York, and then the next album that U2 released, I went to like 6 shows in a row. And all my friends were like, how can you see the same show repeatedly? I'm like, it's not the same. You have to just pay attention to the way the guys look at each other between songs and the smiles on their faces and the way they interact with their crew. And I was just obsessed.
And also you can listen to an album like thousands of times.
Oh,
so
yes.
Of course you can go to a concert multiple times. I'm on your side.
Definitely. And they're human beings, so they're not going to do the same exact thing every night.
Even if they did, it's still magical.
It's still magical. And so I was just completely hooked. And so that whole episode was in the summer of 2015. And then that particular year was a particularly kind of volatile political climate in the U.S. And I have sort of conflict in my family over politics. And I decided I was going to be very rebellious and not go home for Thanksgiving, our, holiday in November. And so I got on the U2 website to see where. I knew they had left the United States and they were touring in Europe, but I didn't know where. So I ran my finger down the list of cities and looked to see where they were playing, maybe in the November timeframe. Turns out they were finishing the tour in Dublin. And I had never, their hometown, right? So I had never been to Dublin, and I decided I was going to first figure out how to find a concert ticket because they were all sold out. So I found this really sketchy website that I wasn't even sure was legit. And I bought a concert ticket, and I waited until the concert ticket arrived in my mailbox because they mailed it to me, and it was legit. I had a real ticket. It was 10 years ago, so we still had real tickets. I miss those days. I like paper tickets.
I know, I miss them too.
So then I booked the plane ticket, and I booked a hotel for 3 nights. And I remember flying there. It's an overnight flight from the U.S., but it's a pretty short flight, so you can't really sleep. And I kept checking the inside pocket of my handbag every 5 seconds to make sure that my passport and my concert ticket were still there. So then I land in Dublin. I dumped my stuff at the hotel, and I immediately went on this U2-themed bike tour that I had signed up for. And I thought it would be a group, so I show up at this bike shop, and it's literally me and the tour guide, and I felt like such a dork, a goofball, but he was so nice. And I remember it was so romantic in terms of like being in the city because it was raining, but we were riding bikes, and we went by the U2's old recording studio and the school that Bono got kicked out of when he was little, and it was really amazing.
So lovely.
And then that night I'd signed up for a U2 themed walking tour. Again, like, how goofy of me, but
I love
I'm so glad I did.
Yeah.
Because I showed up, and there were only 4 people. One was the tour guide, one was a French girl, and 2 were American girls. And they sort of took me under their wing. And the walking tour is great, but the ladies said, do you have a ticket to the show this weekend? I said, yes, for Friday night. And they're like, do you want one for Saturday too? And I'm like, are you kidding me? I get to go to 2 concerts in Dublin. So I ended up going to both of those shows that weekend. And that trip, even though I went by myself, I left there with this huge new family of U2 fans as my friends. And since then, I'm not exaggerating, I've been to, like 40 more shows around. It sounds very dramatic to say around the world, but I saw 2 shows in Sydney, Australia.
Wow.
I saw them in Berlin. I saw them in Barcelona and Rome, Dublin a few more times, and then in the US. So it's become a part of my travel, like a destination, a reason to go to a place either that I haven't been before or that I have been, but I want to see through a different lens. And it's really made it a lot of fun. And I have this amazing U2 family connection because a lot of people do the same thing. We meet up in foreign destinations or international destinations to see our band, and it's magical.
It gives me goosebumps. It just sounds like such a wonderful way to decide. I love when you travel somewhere for a somewhat random reason. Like, you're not going to Sydney because you really want to see the Opera House, But, hey, where's U2 going to be? Sydney. Wow.
Right.
I'd love to go to Sydney. That's great. I'm going to combine that.
That was another rebellious trip of mine because so the first one was 2015, okay?
Yep.
Cut to Thanksgiving in 2019. I, again, didn't want to go home for Thanksgiving.
Right.
Hope my family's not listening to this, but I didn't want to go home for Thanksgiving. And I really wanted to see U2's, it was the Joshua Tree anniversary tour. And I'd already seen some of the shows, but I wasn't finished. I wanted to see another.
More.
And get this, I got an invitation in my email inbox from an Australian law professor who was helping to put on a conference in Sydney called Teaching as a Subversive Activity. So it was sort of this rebellious conference about teaching as, this amazing thing that we do. And it was the same week that U2 was playing at the Sydney Cricket Ground in Sydney, Australia. And I got accepted to the conference first to make sure I had a legitimate reason to go. Yeah. And then I got concert tickets. And U2 concert tickets are not expensive. They keep their ticket prices really low.
Oh, I didn't know that. So even in recent years when some of them have skyrocketed. Oh,
yes.
That's so nice.
And also the fan community has a policy that if fans are selling to other fans, they will only sell them at face value. So it's a really great system. So anyway, I got tickets to the Sydney Cricket Ground. And again, I flew literally 24 hours, from New York to Australia, went straight to Sydney Cricket Ground when I got there. I was so tired.
I'm glad your plane wasn't delayed.
I know. I mean, I had a couple hours to spare, but I wanted to get there early and get a good spot. And again, just like connected with people from all over the world that had done the same thing, just kind of taken time off their work to go see this band. And it was really, really fun. It was great.
Gotta love you too for being a great way to make new friends. After I'd interviewed Heidi and also now after editing this, it just makes me want to put on a YouTube playlist. I will do that soon, I'm sure. I really love the idea of making friends with people who have like a strong common interest like this, like, you know, the love of a good band. It's really cool. Now, my next guest today is Shari Leid. Among many interesting projects, Shari recently wrote a book called Table for 51, Lessons Learned from Sharing Meals Across America, which, as it sounds like, describes her trips around the US, literally meeting up either with strangers or very long-lost acquaintances in every state for a meal. And doing this, Shari made at least this new friend and more, I'm sure, on her travels.
This is during my travels across the United States, and I had never traveled the U.S. before. And for your viewers that can't see me, I'm Asian American, Korean American. I was a little nervous about traveling to the South, being an Asian American woman traveling by myself because of some of our racial strife, the history of racial strife in our country. But what I wasn't prepared for, and I was absolutely welcomed when I went to the South, so that was not a problem whatsoever. I had no problems as I traveled. But when I landed in Cleveland, Ohio, which is somewhere in the Midwest of the United States, I was surprised because when I landed, I was in my rental van going to my rental car location from the airport. And as I looked around, there were flags, which indicated, and there were cars in a row, which indicated a white supremacy rally. It wasn't a political rally. It was a white supremacy rally. And I looked around my van. It was evening time, not super late, but evening time. I looked around the shuttle van, and I was the only person of color in the van. And I felt myself start to get physically nervous. I started to kind of shake. And I got to my rental facility, got in my car, and I have not just a terrible sense of direction, I have wrong way direction. So, like I'm the person who goes out of a store in a mall and I turn the wrong way, or I go out of an elevator and I turn the wrong way, opposite direction. So I'm driving in a new place, trying to, you got your rental car, you're trying to put everything in place, and I'm making wrong turns. And I think, oh my goodness, in my mind, I'm picturing this headline of Asian woman crashes into white supremacy rally. So I'm just picturing these headlines as I'm driving. I don't do that.
Glad.
I end up at my hotel. And these places I was traveling throughout the U.S. to meet strangers, to share meals with, I had already prearranged these meetings. But some places were big cities, some places small towns. A lot of times where I was staying wasn't necessarily the most grand hotel because it had to be close to where my meeting was taking place. If I recall correctly, this was kind of a medium-level hotel. Okay. But I get to my hotel, and I'm actually physically shaking, like my hands are shaking. So I had been nervous because I think I wasn't expecting this.
Yeah.
I did some research after I got to the hotel, and I found that this had been an issue in the area I landed. And the next morning, though, I met the stranger, the woman who was born and raised in that area. Tall, beautiful, blonde hair, blue-eyed woman. She and I hit it off like we were the best of friends. Aww. We were at this restaurant. Luckily, they let us stay. Maybe it's because they had an outdoor eating area, so it was a little more casual outside. We were there for 4 hours just laughing and having the best time. We ordered, a beautiful charcuterie board that was called a bubble board, so it came with champagne and, pink bubbles too. And the waitress even thought that we were former high school friends getting together.
Oh, it looked like a fabulous reunion, kind of so much fun.
Yes.
Oh.
And so the lesson for that was the place that I landed in where I felt the most uncomfortable in all of the 50 states that I landed, all the 50 places I landed during this journey across the U.S. That place, I met the woman who was born and raised there, and she and I hit it off the best.
Amazing, isn't it?
It is. And so it just emphasized not to, when I travel, not to let maybe one bad experience color my view of the entire place or the beauty of the people there.
Yeah. Oh, that kind of unexpected connection I mean, that's one of the beauties of travel anyway. But I think when it contrasts with your fear of, oh, where have I landed? What's going to happen to me here? It is a beautiful lesson, something we all need to remember, I think.
Yeah, and when I left, we were hugging. I said, I can't wait to come back. And I actually have plans to go back.
Oh.
I have, she found a speaking engagement for me.
Oh.
I'm going to start, I've taken on a professional speaking career, so I'm going to go back and speak at an event there. I started these flip the box dinners, that's what I call them, where you invite people that you don't know together at the table to share food. She's hosting one of those. So the place that I felt least welcome, I now feel the most welcome at.
That's
And that's
amazing.
because I didn't let that first experience, of entering a new place during my travels affect the way I was going to see the place.
Oh, that's so lovely. Did you ever ask her about these, the white supremacy rally? Did you mention it to her?
I did. Well, she saw, because I wrote on Facebook my experience that night, just when I landed, and my hopes for a better tomorrow, basically. And when I met with her, she was kind of like, oh, I can't believe you had that experience. But it wasn't a surprise for her.
Right.
She wasn't surprised because of the climate that had been occurring in that area at the time.
Yeah.
She was disappointed that was my first experience, because she really wanted me to have it. These women. So all the women, every state I went to, I met a woman that I absolutely didn't know or I had lost contact with decades ago, and all these women, they just wanted me to feel like home in their state.
That's so lovely, isn't it? I do love this story. Shari's book describes all 50 meals, and as you can imagine, there are multiple new friends made amongst these meals. My final guest today is Steve Hoffman. Steve's had a lifelong love of France and has spent some longer stints there. So he starts by pondering whether you really can make new friends on a normal trip or whether you need to be somewhere for a longer time.
Do you really make friends abroad, depending on how you define friendship?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it raises a lot of interesting ideas or thoughts about travel. And one of them is, first of all, there's the classic, you go to Greece and you drink the Retsina at the taverna, looking out over the Mediterranean at the distant islands. And you think that Retsina is the best wine you've ever had in your life. And then you get home and you go to the local wine shop and you can't believe you drank this gasoline in Greece and that it actually tasted good. And sometimes I wonder if friendship abroad isn't that the settings create, essentially it's a contextual friendship. The setting creates the friendship, but really, you're the same person there. And to a great extent, the people you meet there are as ordinary as anybody you might meet at home. And it's the setting that creates the friendship. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that can be a beautiful thing to accept that this was this person and we had this moment. And it's okay if that moment doesn't extend to the rest of my life. I don't need to bring this person back with me, certainly not physically, but not even psycho-emotionally, and try to make it more than it was. It can be okay that these circumstances created a brief connection that was meaningful for as long as it lasted, and now it doesn't have to be anything anymore. And maybe you check in every once in a while, but it's okay. And I think that can be a beautiful part of travel, that you don't necessarily make friends, but you make connection that resemble friendship for a while and then don't have to be friendship.
It's kind of like the friendship version of a holiday fling.
That was exactly the idea that I was saying. As I was telling that to you, that was the image that came to mind. It's like, you have a fling, it's romantic, it's wonderful, it's fun, but it doesn't have to turn into a marriage or even a long-term relationship. And then I think also, I guess that raises the sort of corollary, which is, often when we're traveling, I feel as if we are not ourselves for a while. We, travel sort of can occasionally allow us to be somebody else, and that's part of the fun of it. And so you kind of slip on this disguise of a person that you'd like to be for a while, but aren't at home. And additionally, in that case, the people you meet are meeting this persona that you've put on for the time that you're in this place, wherever that place happens to be. They're not really necessarily getting to know you in a way that a true friend would, and that in a way that that friendship could be nourishing over a longer period of time. And I still think that's okay. Part of travel is experimentation and having fun and trying things and not being yourself and just seeing where that leads for a while and knowing that the stakes are relatively low. You can always just go home.
True.
Those are, I guess, my first thoughts. I think to that extent, I haven't really made friends abroad in the sense that I like to think about friendship. When I have, it has always been somewhere I've stayed longer than 6 months.
Right.
There's a parallel with travel in general, which is that there's an extent to which travel in the sense of the travel industry or travel as an activity is a way more of consuming than of experiencing. And those experiences, while wonderful and expanding, are also by definition a little bit shallow. And I really come to believe more and more that staying in one place for a while and getting to know that place, essentially becoming friends with the place, having a relationship with the place, runs parallel with an ability to actually make connections with people who could be friends, because you're giving it enough time to breathe, and you're letting the place and the people tell you who they are. And that takes time. You can't do that in a week. You can't do it in 5 days. You certainly can't do it in a week or a month, really. Maybe close. But for me, the friends that I brought home with me who have remained lifelong friends really have happened twice. And it was in Paris, where I was there for 9 months, and then in the south of France for the experience that led to my book, which was 6 months, but then several repeated visits to the same place, meeting the same people, working side by side with them, actually working in the winery with them, working in the vines with them. Those winemakers evolved really from being kind of idol, sort of godlike figures. Here I am in France, and these people make wine. Wine is the religion in France, and here I am with the priests, right? And I was like, what could they possibly want with me? And there was something at a certain point very moving about being there long enough, about existing in a state of sort of ignorance and wonder with them, to an extent that when they did eventually accept me, they were accepting somebody who felt like it was close to the real me. I'd been there long enough.
Interesting.
I had dropped my guard to some extent. I dropped the persona a little bit. And because you just can't keep it up for that long, at some point you are who you are, and it bursts through the persona. But the beautiful moment was then to realize that, wait a minute, we have become friends. And we've actually become real friends because they haven't become friends with this tourist who's trying to present the best of himself. They've agreed to be friends with this real person. And that was a really, really moving moment for me. As somebody who has trouble accepting himself in general, it was their acceptance of me that led to a lot of internal acceptance. That was a big part of the story of that trip. But, it's a story of integrating externally, but it was also a story of some midlife self-acceptance that I'd had difficulty reaching. And it was really those friends explicitly accepting me that helped with that internal movement. In French, I assume it's in German as well, but, there's the formal and informal address, right? Yeah. So in French, it's vous and tu. Vous is plural, but it's also the formal when you first meet somebody, and there's tu is singular, but it's also the informal. So friends and family tend to refer to themselves as tu, and when you first meet somebody, you call them vous. There's a really wonderful moment where our next door neighbor, who really became my best friend and in some sense a mentor and father figure, I'd struggled and asked early on if we could maybe transition away from vous, and it was clear from his discomfort that it was not the moment. And then later on, there was this very crystal clear moment that was very external and obvious, so there's no questioning about what the moment meant when he said, Steve, I think it's time. I think it would be easier if we started to call each other tu. And it was a really, really very life-changing moment in some ways for me. It was this man that I had admired, had felt close to, had taught me a lot about life, and really, in some sense, a lot about myself. That it was a gesture that was unmistakable, saying, "You're in." We're friends. I'll never forget it. It was a beautiful moment.
I can imagine. German does have the same with du and sie, and I find it very awkward and difficult. And the Australian way is to never be formal with anybody at all. So,
as is the American way, right?
Exactly. And so I really struggled with that. But at the same time, when you do have that kind of relationship where they transition that, it's almost like a proposal. It's almost like a formal. We are really now friends, which doesn't happen generally. Like with a relationship with an English-speaking friend, you don't really notice that moment. It's
just this slow movement. At some point, you realize it's happened already, but there's not the explicit turning point moment.
I think Steve's right and wrong. I think it's very true that often the travel circumstances do create just a brief connection, and certainly most of the people we meet on our travels won't become friends, and certainly not lifelong friends. In fact, I just wrote a Substack post last week about people and conversations on my travels which had left a really lasting impression, but not a friendship. People I'm not even in touch with, or I've lost touch with, or I never was in touch with. I'll leave a link to that Substack in the show notes as well. But I do love Steve's story, and the part about the changing of from formal to informal language just reminded me so much of when that had happened to me in Germany. In English, that just doesn't happen. So yeah, it is a different way to kind of recognize a friendship. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to episode 361 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, and thinking about some of the friends you've made on your travels. Do come and tell me about those people. You can come along to the Facebook or LinkedIn groups for Thoughtful Travelers. Just search for Thoughtful Travelers on those platforms and you'll find me. Also come and have a look at the Thoughtful Travelers newsletter at Substack at thoughtfultravel.substack.com. There's often nowadays some interesting conversations in the comments there as well on the posts, and I will leave a link to that Substack post I mentioned about conversations that change my perspective on life. A massive thank you to my three guests today. Firstly, I chatted with Heidi Brown. You can find out more about Heidi at her website, HeidiKristenBrown.com, and I will link to her recent memoir, The Map I Draw, A Memoir of Travel as a Passport to Self. Secondly, I chatted with Shari Leid, and her website is An Imperfectly Perfect Life. So animperfectlyperfectlife.com, great title. And her book, I'll leave a link for that as well, Table 51, Lessons Learned from Sharing Meals Across America. Such a cool project. And finally, I chatted with Steve Hoffman. His website is sjrhoffman.com, and his book, A Season for That, Lost and Found in the Other Southern France, is also fabulous, and I have left a link for that in the show notes. All of this info and more will be in the show notes, and for this episode, they are at notaballerina.com/361. As always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.